A racist flight attendant slaps a black boy, not knowing that his father owns the airline. As the boy's quiet tears draw the attention of passengers, his father appears, leaving the flight attendant stunned. What will happen to her job? And how will the airline owner make her regret her actions? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The gentle hum of the jet engines provided a soothing backdrop as Marcus Evans settled into the plush leather seat of his airline's business class suite. His 10-year-old son, Jaden, sat beside him, eyes wide with wonder as he took in the luxurious surroundings. The private pod was like a small room, with rich wood accents and soft lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. Marcus watched his son's face light up as a flight attendant brought them fresh orange juice in crystal glasses. Jaden's infectious smile made Marcus's heart swell with pride and a touch of guilt. He hadn't seen that smile enough lately. "You know, Jaden," Marcus began, his deep voice warm and gentle, "I can't tell you how happy I am that we're finally taking this trip together." He adjusted his perfectly pressed suit and turned to face his son fully. Jaden took a careful sip of his juice. "Me too, Dad. The plane is amazing. I can't believe you own all of this." Marcus chuckled, but his expression grew more serious. "It is amazing, son, but you know what's even more amazing? That we're finally going to see Mom after so long." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know these past few months haven't been easy, with me traveling so much for work." Jaden's fingers traced patterns on the condensation of his glass. "I understand, Dad. You're busy because you have important things to do." The maturity in his son's voice made Marcus's chest tighten. "No, son. Nothing is more important than you and your mother." He reached over and placed his hand on Jaden's shoulder. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how much time I've missed with you both. All these business meetings and expansion plans, they're important, but they're not everything." The plane began its taxi down the runway as Jaden looked up at his father with curious eyes. "Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed, his voice firm with conviction. "From now on, things are going to be different. Family comes first, always. I promise you that." A few hours into the flight, the gentle hum of the engines had become a soothing background noise. Jaden shifted in his comfortable seat, glancing at his father who had dozed off while reading some business documents. The young boy carefully unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, stretching his legs after sitting for so long. The business class cabin was spacious and elegant, with soft lighting that created a peaceful atmosphere. Jaden stepped out of their private suite, his sock-covered feet sinking into the plush carpet. He remembered his mother's words about always being polite, especially when he was representing his family. As he made his way down the aisle, he encountered an elderly couple who smiled warmly at him. "Excuse me," he said softly as he passed by their seats, earning appreciative nods from both passengers. A flight attendant with a kind face gave him a small wave, which he returned with a bright smile. The walk to the bathroom felt like a mini-adventure. Jaden enjoyed seeing the different faces and hearing snippets of quiet conversations in various languages. After using the facilities, he stopped by the refreshment station to get a glass of water, carefully holding it with both hands. On his return, Jaden maintained the same courteous demeanor, quietly making his way back to his suite. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, nothing serious, just a gentle shake, but it was enough to throw off his balance slightly. He stumbled forward, accidentally bumping into a flight attendant who was organizing items on her service cart. Some water splashed from his glass onto her crisp navy blue uniform, creating dark spots on the fabric. The flight attendant, Emily Carter, looked down at her outfit, her lips pressing into a thin line. She had noticed Jaden earlier during the flight, but had deliberately avoided serving their suite, allowing other attendants to handle that section instead. "I'm so sorry," Jaden exclaimed immediately, his voice filled with genuine concern. "It was an accident. Can I help you clean it up?" He reached for a nearby napkin, eager to make things right. Emily's jaw tightened as she took a step back, her eyes flickering between Jaden and her dampened uniform. She forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, her fingers gripping the edge of her service card a little too hard. "It's fine," she said, her tone clipped and cold despite her attempt to maintain professionalism. Jaden noticed her reaction but pressed on with his apology, his good manners prevailing despite her frosty response. "I really am sorry, ma'am. I should have been more careful." His sincerity was evident in every word, his young face showing genuine remorse for the accident. Emily's nostrils flared slightly as she dabbed at her uniform with a cloth. Under her breath, she muttered something inaudible, her movements becoming more aggressive as she tried to dry the fabric. The tension in her body language was clear, even as she attempted to maintain a professional facade. Feeling the uncomfortable atmosphere, Jaden shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The warmth and excitement he had felt earlier during his little journey through the cabin began to fade. He glanced back toward his suite, then at Emily once more before starting to walk away from the increasingly awkward situation. As he made his way back, his steps were a bit quicker than before, but he maintained his composure, still remembering to be polite as he passed other passengers. As Jaden turned to walk back to his suite, Emily's face darkened with anger. Her previous attempts at maintaining professionalism crumbled as she watched the young boy trying to leave. In 3 quick steps, she moved in front of him, effectively blocking his path back to his seat. "Just where do you think you're going?" she demanded, her voice sharp and cutting through the quiet cabin atmosphere. "You can't just walk away into the business class suites." Several nearby passengers looked up from their tablets and magazines, startled by her harsh tone. Jaden took a small step backward, his eyes widening at her sudden aggression. The peaceful atmosphere of the cabin seemed to evaporate as Emily launched into a tirade, her words becoming increasingly hostile and filled with racial slurs that made several passengers gasp audibly. I said I was sorry," Jaden stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to maintain his composure, just as his parents had taught him. But Emily's words struck him like physical blows, each slur making him feel smaller and more vulnerable. "Sorry isn't good enough," Emily snapped, her face contorted with anger. "You people always think you can just do whatever you want and get away with it. I wonder how a black person like you even gets the money to be on a plane. The economy class is that way, mister." Her words dropped with prejudice, shocking even herself, but she couldn't seem to stop. Before Jaden could step around her, Emily's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist roughly. Her fingers dug into his skin as she held him in place, causing him to wince slightly at the pressure. The few passengers who had been watching now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none intervened. "Didn't you hear me? How did you even get in here?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "This is business class. You must have snuck in from the economy." She looked him up and down with disdain, taking in his casual but clearly expensive clothing without really seeing it. "There's no way you belong here." Jaden's lower lip trembled as he tried to pull his arm free, but Emily's grip only tightened. "I didn't sneak in," he protested quietly, his voice shaking. "My father and I—" "Don't lie to me!" Emily cut him off, her voice rising. "I know exactly what's going on here. You thought you could just wander up here and pretend you belong, didn't you?" The flight attendant snapped and ended up slapping him. Her actions were filled with assumptions and prejudice, each one striking at Jaden's dignity. Jaden looked around the cabin, his eyes pleading for help from the other passengers. Some quickly averted their gaze while others watched with concerned expressions but remained frozen in their seats. The fear and confusion on his young face was evident as he realized he was being treated unfairly simply because of his race. Emily continued to hold on to his wrist, her grip unyielding as she prepared to continue her humiliating tirade. Jaden's eyes began to fill with tears, but he blinked them back, trying to stay strong, even as Emily's words became more hostile and her assumptions more outrageous. Marcus Evans felt a sudden unease wash over him. Something wasn't right. His paternal instincts, honed over years of raising Jaden, sparked an immediate concern when his son didn't return after what should have been a brief trip to the washroom. Rising from his plush leather seat, he stepped out of their private suite into the main cabin area. The scene before him made his blood run cold. There stood Emily, her fingers wrapped tightly around Jaden's wrist, her face contorted with obvious hostility. His son's usual confident posture was replaced by a defensive stance that no child should ever have to assume. Marcus's protective instincts surged as he strode purposefully toward them, his footsteps silent against the carpeted aisle. "Release my son's hand. Now." Marcus's voice, though quiet, carried an unmistakable authority that commanded immediate attention. The words cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Emily spun around, startled by the unexpected voice behind her. The color drained from her face as recognition dawned in her eyes. Her grip on Jaden's wrist loosened instantly, and her hand fell limply to her side. "Mr. Evans, I didn't realize—" Emily stammered, her previous confidence evaporating. She knew Mr. Evans was the owner of the Airlines, but had no idea this boy, dressed in simple clothes, could be his son. "There was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to—" Her words trailed off as she met Marcus's steady gaze. "Jaden," Marcus said softly, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. "Please return to our suite. I'll handle this." His tone was gentle but firm, leaving no room for discussion. Jaden nodded, rubbing his wrist where Emily's fingers had gripped him. As he walked past Emily, he cast a bewildered look at her, unable to reconcile her current demeanor with the hostility she'd shown moments before. His footsteps faded as he made his way back to the safety of their suite. "Ms. Carter," Marcus began, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've seen enough. This is your last flight with this airline. Please leave the cabin after landing and report to the lead flight attendant. Your services are no longer required." Emily's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. "Mr. Evans, please, I can explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "There is nothing to explain. You're fired," Marcus interrupted, his tone final. "What I witnessed requires no explanation. Your behavior toward my son was unacceptable on every level. Please leave. Now." Emily's shoulders slumped in defeat. She turned and walked away, her steps unsteady as she made her way toward the front of the cabin. The weight of her actions showed clearly in her expression, a mixture of shock at the consequences and shame at being caught treating a child so poorly. Marcus watched her retreat, his jaw set firmly as he processed what had just occurred. Once she disappeared from view, he turned and headed back to their suite, knowing his son needed him now more than ever. The familiar protective instinct that had first alerted him to trouble now urged him to comfort Jaden and ensure he felt safe and secure once again. The flight finally landed. Soon after, the sleek black luxury car glided smoothly through the city streets, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside, Jaden bounced excitedly in his seat, his earlier distress temporarily forgotten as thoughts of seeing his mother filled his mind. "Mom's going to love the gift we got her in Paris," Jaden exclaimed, patting the shopping bag beside him. "Do you think she missed us as much as we missed her?" Marcus smiled at his son's enthusiasm, though his own thoughts briefly drifted back to the incident on the plane. His expression darkened momentarily as he remembered Emily's cruel treatment of Jaden. The memory of his son's confused and hurt expression made his jaw clench, but he quickly pushed the thought aside, not wanting to dampen Jaden's current joy. "I'm sure she missed us even more," Marcus replied, ruffling Jaden's hair affectionately. As their car pulled up to their elegant suburban home, Sophia Evans was already waiting at the front door. Her face lit up with pure joy at the sight of her family. Jaden barely waited for the car to come to a complete stop before unbuckling his seatbelt. "Mom!" he called out, rushing from the car and into her waiting arms. Sophia wrapped him in a tight embrace, pressing kisses to the top of his head. "My sweet boy," she murmured, holding him close. "I've missed you so much." She looked up as Marcus approached, her smile widening as she reached out to pull him into the family hug. Inside the house, they settled in the living room, where Jaden eagerly began sharing stories about their trip. His eyes sparkled as he described the Eiffel Tower and the delicious French pastries they'd tried. However, his enthusiasm dimmed noticeably when he reached the part about their flight home. And then, Jaden's voice grew quieter, his shoulders slumping slightly. "There was this flight attendant. I accidentally spilled some water on her uniform, Mom. I said sorry right away, but she got really mad. Sophia leaned forward, her maternal instincts alerting her to the change in her son's demeanor. "What happened, sweetheart?" Jaden's voice wavered. "She grabbed my hand really hard and slapped me. She said mean things about me not belonging in business class because..." He trailed off, his eyes filling with tears. Sophia's expression transformed from concern to barely contained fury. She looked at Marcus, who nodded grimly, confirming their son's account. "She used racial slurs, Sophia," Marcus added quietly. "I fired her on the spot." "Fired her?" Sophia's voice was tight with anger. "Marcus, that's not enough. Our son was physically and verbally assaulted by your employee. She needs to understand that this kind of behavior has serious consequences." Marcus nodded slowly, watching as Sophia pulled Jaden close to her side, protectively stroking his hair. "You're right," he agreed. "Perhaps we need to take additional steps to ensure this becomes a learning experience for her." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus's home office as he sat at his mahogany desk, his fingers moving swiftly across his laptop keyboard. He had spent the early hours diving deep into Emily Carter's background, using his business connections to gather information. "Interesting," he murmured, reviewing the findings on his screen. Emily's financial records showed mounting credit card debt, and her rental payments were already 2 months behind. Her resume had been posted on several job sites, desperately seeking new employment after her dismissal. Sophia entered the office carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She placed one beside Marcus and settled into the leather chair across from him. "What did you find out?" "She's in a tough spot," Marcus replied, turning the laptop so Sophia could see. "Single, living alone, and now unemployed. She's applied to dozens of positions in the past 24 hours. Sophia's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained determined. Maybe this is our opportunity to help her see things differently, to understand the people she's prejudiced against are just that, people. From the doorway came a small voice. "I want to help too." They turned to see Jaden standing there, still in his pajamas, his expression serious beyond his years. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" Sophia asked, opening her arms to him. Jaden walked over and climbed onto her lap. "Yes," he said firmly. "Maybe if she learns to be nice, she won't hurt anyone else like she hurt me." Marcus sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. "I think I have an idea." He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "Remember David Thompson? He owns that staffing agency downtown." Sophia nodded, beginning to understand where Marcus was heading with this. "What if we arrange for Emily to get placed in a position where she'll have to work closely with Black colleagues? Somewhere she can't easily turn down given her financial situation?" Marcus suggested, already dialing David's number. "That could work," Sophia agreed, running her fingers through Jaden's hair. "She needs to learn that her prejudices are unfounded, and the best way to do that is through direct experience." The phone rang twice before David's voice came through. Marcus explained the situation, including the incident with Jaden and their desire to create a learning opportunity rather than just punishment. "I think I have the perfect position," David said after listening to Marcus's proposal. "We've got an opening at a community center in the heart of the city. They need an administrative assistant. The pay is decent, enough that someone in her situation couldn't easily refuse." Marcus smiled, catching Sophia's eye. "And the staff?" "Predominantly Black," David confirmed. "The director is an amazing woman who's been running community outreach programs for 20 years. She has a way of bringing out the best in people." After finalizing the details with David, Marcus ended the call. He looked at his family, Sophia's satisfied expression and Jaden's hopeful eyes, and felt confident in their decision. "Sometimes," Sophia said to Jaden, "people need to learn important lessons about treating others with respect. This isn't about punishment. It's about helping Mrs. Carter become a better person." Jaden nodded solemnly. "I hope she learns to be kind." Emily's hands trembled as she held her phone, listening to the staffing agency representative describe the position at Oak Haven Elder Care Home. Her bank account balance flashed through her mind, barely enough for next month's rent. She swallowed hard. "Yes, I'll take it," she said, her voice tight. "I can start tomorrow." The next morning, Emily stood outside the red brick building, her heart pounding. Through the glass doors, she could see Black residents in the common area, some reading newspapers, others chatting with caregivers. Her stomach churned. Inside, the smell of cleaning supplies and breakfast lingered in the air. Ms. Rosalind Turner greeted her with a warm smile, her gray-streaked hair pulled back neatly in a bun. "Welcome to Oak Haven, Emily. Let me show you around." Emily followed Ms. Turner through the facility, trying to hide her discomfort as they passed residents in wheelchairs and walking frames. Her new uniform felt stiff and foreign against her skin. "Your first task will be helping Mr. Johnson with his morning routine," Ms. Turner explained, leading Emily to room 112. "He needs assistance getting dressed and preparing for breakfast." Emily's jaw clenched as she entered the room. Mr. Johnson, an elderly Black man with kind eyes, smiled at her. "Good morning, young lady." "Morning," Emily mumbled, avoiding eye contact as she helped him with his buttons and socks. Her movements were mechanical, her touch minimal. Throughout the morning, Emily went through the motions of her duties, distributing medication, helping with meals, and assisting residents with basic tasks. Each interaction felt like a test of her endurance. When Mrs. Williams wanted to show her family photos, Emily barely glanced at them, nodding absently. From the nurse's station, Ms. Turner watched Emily's rigid posture and distant demeanor. She noticed how Emily would step back quickly after any physical contact, how she'd cut conversations short with residents who tried to engage her. During lunch, Emily sat alone in the break room picking at her sandwich. The sound of laughter drifted in from the dining area where other caregivers were helping residents with their meals. "You know," Ms. Turner said, entering the break room, "Mr. Johnson used to be a jazz musician, played with some of the greats in New Orleans." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "That's nice." "And Mrs. Williams? She was one of the first Black teachers in her district, taught for 40 years. Ms. Turner's voice was gentle but firm. "Everyone here has a story worth hearing, Emily." By the end of her shift, Emily's muscles ached from the physical work, but it was the emotional strain that weighed heaviest. As she gathered her belongings from her locker, her hands shook slightly. Ms. Turner appeared beside her. "First days are always challenging," she said kindly. "Tomorrow will be better." Emily nodded stiffly, unable to meet Ms. Turner's eyes. As she walked to her car, she knew she should quit. Everything in her wanted to quit, but the reality of her empty bank account kept her from pulling out her phone to make that call. She'd have to come back tomorrow whether she liked their Black skin or not. Emily's second day at Oak Haven Elder Care Home started with a heaviness in her steps. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patches of light across the polished floors, but she felt none of its warmth. Her hands clutched her bag tightly as she made her way to the locker room. "Good morning, Emily," called out one of her coworkers, Sarah, with a bright smile. Emily merely nodded, quickly turning away to store her belongings. Her first task of the day was helping Mr. Harold Jefferson with his morning routine. She found him sitting in his armchair, already dressed, but struggling with his breakfast tray. "The oatmeal's a bit cold," he said kindly. "Would you mind heating it up for me?" Emily grabbed the bowl roughly. "Fine, whatever," she muttered, her movements sharp and impatient. When she returned with the warmed oatmeal, Mr. Jefferson looked at her with gentle concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right, dear? You seem troubled this morning." Emily's frustration bubbled over. "I'm fine," she snapped, practically dropping the bowl on his tray. "I don't need your concern. Please step further away." Mr. Jefferson's response surprised her. Instead of anger, his voice remained soft and understanding. "You know, sometimes the most rewarding work takes time to appreciate. I hope you'll find that here." Throughout the morning, Emily watched her co-workers with growing irritation. They moved from room to room with easy smiles, sharing jokes with residents, listening to their stories with genuine interest. Sarah offered to show Emily proper lifting techniques, while another coworker, Michael, invited her to join them for lunch. "We're all family here," Michael said warmly. Emily turned away. "I'm fine on my own." By midday, Ms. Turner called Emily into her office. The head caregiver sat behind her desk, her expression concerned but kind. "Emily," she began, "I've noticed you're having some difficulty adjusting. Our residents deserve to be treated with respect and compassion. They've lived full lives, fought hard battles, and now they need our care." Emily stared at the floor, her jaw tight, but something in Ms. Turner's words made her stomach twist uncomfortably. "I understand this work isn't easy," Ms. Turner continued, "but if you open your heart just a little, you might find it incredibly rewarding." The rest of Emily's shift passed in a blur of uncomfortable interactions. She watched as her coworkers easily connected with residents, sharing laughs and tender moments that made her own behavior feel increasingly out of place. As she gathered her things at the end of the day, Emily felt isolated. The warmth and community she witnessed around her only highlighted her own coldness. She knew she couldn't quit. Her bank account wouldn't allow it. But for the first time, she felt a tiny crack in her armor, a whisper of doubt about her own attitude. Emily's third week at Oak Haven Elder Care Home began much like the others, with tension in her shoulders and resistance in her heart. She watched Sarah kneel beside Mr. Marriott's wheelchair, showing him photos of her weekend gardening project on her phone. In another corner, Michael sat with Mrs. Davis, patiently helping her complete a crossword puzzle, while sharing stories about their favorite books. These natural connections made Emily's stomach twist with a mixture of frustration and something else she couldn't quite name. "Emily," Ms. Turner called from the nurse's station, "could you help Ms. Coleman to the dining area this morning?" Emily nodded stiffly, making her way to room 215. She found Ms. Betty Coleman already dressed, sitting in her armchair by the window. The elderly woman's face lit up when Emily entered, despite Emily's clear reluctance. "Good morning, dear," Ms. Coleman greeted warmly. "Such a beautiful day, isn't it?" Emily mumbled a response as she helped Ms. Coleman into her wheelchair, her movements mechanical and distant. As they made their way down the hallway, Ms. Coleman began to speak, her voice soft but clear. "You know, this reminds me of when my daughter learned to walk," she said, chuckling. "She'd hold on to my hands just like this, so determined to move forward on her own. Now she's a pediatrician in Chicago, helping other little ones grow strong." Emily's grip on the wheelchair handles tightened, but she found herself listening despite her usual attempt to tune out such conversations. "And my grandson," Ms. Coleman continued. "He just started college last fall. First in our family to go. My husband and I worked 3 jobs each when our children were young, saving every penny we could. Times were hard back then, but we never lost hope." Something in Ms. Coleman's voice made Emily's steps slow slightly. The woman spoke of hardships without bitterness, of struggles without resentment. "We lived through times when some folks wouldn't even look us in the eye," Ms. Coleman shared, her voice steady. "But my mama always said, hatred makes the heart heavy, but love makes it light. I've found that to be true all my life." Emily felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. Her usual wall of indifference wavered as Ms. Coleman's words settled in the air between them. As they reached the dining area, Ms. Coleman turned slightly in her chair, looking up at Emily with kind eyes. "You know, dear, kindness can go a long way. It's never too late to open your heart." Emily stood frozen for a moment, unsettled by the gentle wisdom in those words. Something stirred within her, a feeling she wasn't ready to examine. Quickly shaking it off, she helped Ms. Coleman to her usual table and hurried away, trying to ignore the warmth that had briefly penetrated her carefully maintained coldness. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Oak Haven Elder Care Home as Emily helped Mrs. Anderson arrange her collection of family photographs. The gentle clicking of frames against the bedside table filled the quiet room, until footsteps in the hallway caught their attention. Emily's heart nearly stopped when she saw Jaden Evans standing in the doorway, his familiar face causing her stomach to twist with sudden recognition. His eyes widened slightly as he spotted her, and she noticed his shoulders tense ever so slightly. Behind him stood Marcus Evans, his presence commanding yet calm. Heat crept up Emily's neck as she remembered their last encounter on the plane. She busied herself with the photo frames, trying to appear composed while her hands trembled slightly. "Hello," Jaden said politely, his voice steady despite the obvious recognition in his eyes. He stepped into the room with the quiet confidence she remembered from the flight, though now she saw it differently. Mrs. Anderson brightened immediately. "Jaden, come in, dear. I was just telling Emily about my grandchildren." In the hallway, Marcus approached Ms. Turner, who had appeared carrying her clipboard. "Mr. Evans," she greeted warmly. "Wonderful to see you again." "The pleasure's mine, Miss Turner," Marcus replied, his deep voice carrying into the room. "How are our friends doing today?" "Oh, they're always in better spirits when Jaden visits," Ms. Turner beamed. "He's been reading to Mr. Thompson and helping Mrs. Davis with her puzzle books. The residents absolutely adore him." Emily watched from the corner of her eye as Jaden moved closer to Mrs. Anderson's bed, carefully examining the photographs she was so proud of. His genuine interest in the elderly woman's stories made Emily's past treatment of him feel even more shameful. "Are you enjoying your time here?" Emily found herself asking, her voice smaller than usual. She immediately regretted drawing attention to herself, but Jaden turned to her with a gentle smile. "Yes, I am," he replied simply. "The residents have so many interesting stories to share." His response held no trace of bitterness or resentment, though Emily knew he had every right to feel both. Ms. Turner's voice drifted in from the hallway as she continued speaking with Marcus. "Jaden has such a natural way with our residents. They look forward to his visits all week." Emily felt the weight of her past actions pressing down on her chest as she watched Jaden listen intently to Mrs. Anderson's story about her wedding day. The contrast between his current kindness and her previous cruelty became painfully clear. Her hands stilled on the photo frames as the full impact of her behavior began to sink in. As Jaden and Marcus prepared to leave, Emily stood quietly by Mrs. Anderson's bed, watching them go. The uncomfortable weight in her chest grew heavier with each step they took toward the door. She observed how Jaden waved goodbye to several residents, his smile genuine and warm, and felt a deep sense of shame wash over her. The morning after encountering Jaden, Emily walked through Oak Haven's doors with her shoulders tense and her mind clouded. Her usual sharp movements were slower, more hesitant, as memories of yesterday's interaction mingled with moments from the past few weeks. She remembered Ms. Turner's patient guidance when she first started, showing her how to properly assist residents with their daily needs. The memory of Ms. Coleman's warm smile despite Emily's cold demeanor flashed through her mind. Even when she had been at her worst, they had shown her nothing but kindness. During morning rounds, Emily found herself pausing longer in each room, actually listening as residents shared their stories. Mrs. Davis, while Emily helped her with breakfast, spoke about growing up in the segregated South, her voice strong despite the painful memories. "You know, dear," Mrs. Davis said, patting Emily's hand, "hatred is such a heavy burden to carry. I learned long ago that letting it go makes life so much lighter." Emily's throat tightened unexpectedly at these words. She busied herself adjusting Mrs. Davis's pillows, but the words stayed with her. Later that morning, her co-worker Sarah offered to help her with a particularly challenging task. Emily, who would normally have refused, found herself accepting the assistance. Sarah's genuine smile of appreciation surprised her. By afternoon, Emily was assigned to help Mr. Harold Jefferson with his physical therapy exercises. She approached his room with a different energy than before, remembering how she had dismissed his kindness in their previous interactions. "Well, look who's here," Mr. Jefferson said warmly as she entered. "There's something different about you today, Emily." Emily helped him sit up, her movements gentler than usual. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Jefferson." He chuckled softly. "Oh, I think you do. Your eyes are softer today. You're actually looking at me when I speak, not through me." As they worked through his exercises, Mr. Jefferson shared stories about his life as a teacher, about students whose lives he'd touched, about the challenges he'd faced and overcome. Emily found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and listening intently to his responses. "You know," he said as they finished, "I've been watching you since you started here. Every day, I've seen that wall you built around yourself. But today I see some cracks in it. That's good. Walls don't protect us, they just keep us from truly living. Emily felt her eyes grow warm. I'm trying, she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. That's all any of us can do, Mr. Jefferson responded, his eyes kind. Just keep trying. As her shift continued, Emily noticed small changes in her own behavior. She smiled more easily at her coworkers. She took extra time ensuring residents were comfortable. When Ms. Turner praised her improved attitude, Emily felt a flutter of pride instead of her usual defensiveness. Walking home that evening, Emily felt lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of her prejudices, while not completely gone, had begun to lift. She thought about the residents' stories, about their resilience and kindness in the face of adversity. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected: respect, and perhaps even admiration, for the people she had so quickly judged before. Marcus sat in his home office, sunlight streaming through tall windows as he contemplated his next move regarding Emily. He turned to Jaden, who sat quietly in a plush leather chair across from his desk. "Son, I need your help with something important," Marcus said, his voice gentle but serious. "Remember how we talked about giving people chances to learn and grow?" Jaden nodded, sitting up straighter. "Like with Ms. Emily at the care home?" "Exactly." Marcus leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I'd like you to visit the care home today, but without letting Ms. Emily know you're there. I want you to watch how she treats the residents and her co-workers now." "Like a secret mission?" Jaden asked, his eyes brightening with interest. Marcus smiled. "Something like that. But it's more about understanding if someone can really change their heart. Do you think you can do that?" "Yes, Dad. I'll be careful and watch everything." Later that morning, Jaden arrived at Oak Haven Elder Care Home, slipping quietly through the entrance. He knew the layout well from his previous visits and found spots where he could observe without being noticed. The familiar scent of clean linens and warm meals filled the air as he moved through the hallways. From behind a corner, Jaden watched Emily helping Mrs. Thompson with her breakfast. Her movements were gentler than he remembered, and she actually smiled as the elderly woman told a story about her grandchildren. Emily even laughed genuinely at Mrs. Thompson's joke about her morning coffee. Moving to another observation point, Jaden noticed Emily assisting Mr. Jefferson with his walking exercises. Her face showed concentration and care as she supported his steps down the hallway. When Mr. Jefferson needed to rest, she patiently waited, engaging in conversation rather than showing the irritation Jaden remembered from their first encounter. However, Jaden also caught moments when Emily's old self surfaced. When a resident accidentally spilled water on her uniform, similar to what Jaden had done on the plane, her initial reaction was a flash of anger. Though she quickly controlled it, Jaden saw her jaw clench and her hands ball into fists before she took a deep breath and helped clean up the mess. Later, during lunch service, Emily seemed to hesitate before helping certain residents, as if her old biases were fighting with her new understanding. These moments were brief but noticeable to Jaden's observant eyes. As the afternoon wore on, Jaden witnessed more interactions. Emily shared a joke with her black co-workers during their break, though she still seemed slightly reserved. When Ms. Turner gave her instructions, Emily listened respectfully, a far cry from her previous defensive attitude. After several hours of observation, Jaden quietly left the facility and returned home to his father's office. Marcus looked up expectantly as Jaden entered. "What did you see, son?" Marcus asked, giving Jaden his full attention. "She's different, Dad," Jaden replied thoughtfully. "She's nicer to everyone, and she actually seems to care about the residents now. But," he paused, considering his words carefully, "sometimes I can still see her old self trying to come out, like she's fighting with herself about how to act." Marcus nodded, taking in his son's observations. "And how does that make you feel about her progress?" "I think she's trying," Jaden said slowly. "She's better than before, but maybe she still needs more time to really change." Marcus parked his luxury sedan a block away from Oak Haven Elder Care Home, adjusting his tie as he prepared for his covert observation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the building's entrance as he made his way inside, careful to blend in with the regular visitors. Finding a quiet corner near the day room, Marcus settled into an armchair with a newspaper, positioning himself where he could observe without drawing attention. The familiar sounds of the care home, soft conversations, gentle music, and the occasional shuffle of walkers filled the air. Emily appeared, pushing a cart of supplies down the hallway. Her uniform was neat, her demeanor professional as she approached Ms. Betty Coleman's room. Marcus watched intently as Emily helped the elderly woman with her morning routine. "Thank you, dear," Ms. Coleman's warm voice carried across the hall. "You're so much gentler these days." Emily's smile seemed genuine as she adjusted Ms. Coleman's pillows. "Just trying my best, Ms. Betty. Would you like your morning tea now?" Later, Marcus observed Emily assisting Mr. Harold Jefferson with his physical therapy exercises. Her patience showed as she supported his slow, careful steps down the hallway. "You're doing great, Mr. Jefferson," she encouraged, her voice carrying none of the condescension that had marked her earlier weeks at the facility. The real test came when Mrs. Parker, known for her demanding nature, called out sharply from her room. "Nurse! Nurse! I need help right now!" Emily's shoulders tensed visibly as she excused herself from Mr. Jefferson. Marcus noticed her taking a deep breath before entering Mrs. Parker's room. "What's wrong, Mrs. Parker?" Emily asked, her voice strained but controlled. "Everything's wrong. My pillows aren't right, my water's too warm, and nobody's been in to check on me for hours." Mrs. Parker's complaints echoed into the hallway. Marcus watched Emily's internal struggle play across her face. Her jaw clenched, and her hands fidgeted at her sides. The old Emily would have snapped or dismissed the complaints, but now she fought to maintain her composure. "I'll help you with everything, Mrs. Parker," Emily said, though her voice carried a hint of frustration. "Let's start with your pillows." As Emily worked to address Mrs. Parker's demands, her patience began to wear thin. Her movements became more abrupt, her responses shorter. When Mrs. Parker complained about the temperature of fresh water Emily had just brought, Marcus saw Emily's old defensiveness resurface briefly before she suppressed it. The interaction revealed the gaps in Emily's transformation. While she managed to avoid any outright rudeness, her body language and subtle expressions showed she hadn't fully embraced the empathy her role required. The warmth she showed to Ms. Coleman and Mr. Jefferson disappeared when faced with a more challenging resident. Marcus folded his newspaper and stood quietly. He'd seen enough to understand that while Emily had made significant progress, her journey toward genuine change wasn't complete. Her improved behavior with some residents showed promise, but her struggles with more difficult situations revealed that her biases and impatience still lurked beneath the surface. Emily sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. The screen showed yet another message from a former colleague declining to help with her rent. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through previous conversations. 5 rejections in total, each more dismissive than the last. "Sorry, Em, things are tight right now," read one message. "Maybe you should have thought about this before getting fired," said another. The stark reality of her situation hit hard. These people, whom she'd shared countless luxurious dinners and shopping trips with, had vanished the moment her status changed. Her bank account showed a measly $127, nowhere near enough for next week's rent. At work the next day, Emily struggled to maintain her composure while assisting residents. Her mind kept wandering to the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the break room, picking at a simple sandwich she'd brought from home, a far cry from the expensive cafe lunches she used to enjoy. Mr. Harold Jefferson wheeled himself into the break room, his kind eyes taking in her dejected posture. "Everything all right, Miss Emily?" Emily quickly wiped away a stray tear. "I'm fine, Mr. Jefferson. Just tired." He moved closer to her table, his weathered face showing genuine concern. "Now, I may be old, but I can still recognize when someone's carrying a heavy burden." Something about his gentle tone broke through Emily's defenses. Before she knew it, she found herself telling him about her financial struggles, the friends who'd abandoned her, and her fear of losing her apartment. Mr. Jefferson listened quietly, nodding with understanding. Then, to Emily's surprise, he reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $50 bills. "Mr. Jefferson, no, I couldn't possibly," Emily protested, but he held up his hand. "I'm not offering you charity, child. I'm offering you hope." He placed the money on the table. "Sometimes we all need a little help to get back on our feet." Emily stared at the bills, her vision blurring with tears. This man, whom she'd initially treated with such disdain, was showing her more kindness than any of her supposed friends. "When my late wife and I were young," Mr. Jefferson continued, "we faced plenty of closed doors. But it was the unexpected kindness of strangers that got us through. That's how community works. We lift each other up." Emily's hands shook as she accepted the money, overwhelmed by the significance of this moment. Here was someone she'd once looked down upon, someone she'd deemed beneath her, showing her what true friendship meant. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of more than just financial gratitude. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Mr. Jefferson smiled warmly. "Just pay it forward when you can, Miss Emily. That's all the repayment I need." The next morning, Emily arrived at the elder care home 20 minutes early, something she'd never done before. She carefully arranged her uniform, smoothing down the wrinkles and adjusting her name tag with newfound pride. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the facility's clean floors. As she made her rounds, Emily greeted each resident by name, her smile genuine rather than forced. She took extra time helping Mr. Thompson with his breakfast, patiently cutting his food into smaller pieces when she noticed him struggling. The other staff members exchanged surprised glances, noticing how she lingered to chat with residents rather than rushing through her tasks. During mid-morning activities, Emily found herself assisting Ms. Betty Coleman with her physical therapy exercises. As they worked together, Ms. Coleman studied Emily's face with knowing eyes. "There's something different about you today, dear," Ms. Coleman observed, her voice warm and encouraging. "You seem lighter somehow." Emily paused, helping Ms. Coleman stretch her arms. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she admitted softly. "When I first came here, I had some pretty ugly thoughts about working with—" She trailed off, ashamed to complete the sentence. "With black folks?" Ms. Coleman finished gently, no judgment in her tone. Emily nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I was so wrong. The kindness I've received here, especially from Mr. Jefferson recently, it's opened my eyes. I never expected to find such genuine care and wisdom in a place I initially dreaded working in." Ms. Coleman reached out and patted Emily's hand. "Growth isn't always comfortable, child, but recognizing our mistakes and choosing to change, that's what makes us human." "I feel grateful," Emily continued, helping Ms. Coleman into her wheelchair. "Everyone here has shown me such patience even when I didn't deserve it." "That's because we see the potential for good in everyone," Ms. Coleman replied. "Just like a garden needs time and care to bloom, so does the human heart. You're blooming now, Emily." Throughout the rest of her shift, Emily moved through her duties with a new sense of purpose. She listened attentively to residents' stories, offered genuine smiles, and found herself actually enjoying the connections she was making. When one resident became agitated, she responded with patience and understanding rather than frustration. As the afternoon sun began to set, Emily completed her final tasks of the day. Her feet were tired, but her heart felt full. For the first time since starting at the care home, she truly understood the value of her work and the privilege of caring for others. Emily sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone with trembling hands. The past due notices were piling up on her kitchen table, their red stamps seeming to mock her situation. After several deep breaths, she dialed Jessica's number, her former best friend from her flight attendant days. "Hello?" Jessica's voice was cold, lacking the warmth it once held. "Jessica, hi," Emily said, her voice small. "I know we haven't talked in a while, but I'm in a really tough spot financially. I was wondering if maybe you could help." "Are you serious right now?" Jessica cut her off. "You think you can just call me up asking for money? Where were you when I needed support during my divorce?" "Oh, right. too busy judging everyone around you. Sorry, Emily, but I don't have anything for you. The line went dead before Emily could respond. She set her phone down, tears welling up in her eyes. The rejection stung more than she'd expected, especially coming from someone who'd once been so close. The next day at work, Emily tried to maintain her usual composure, but her shoulders slumped and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. As she helped serve lunch in the dining room, Ms. Hattie Richards, an elderly resident known for her sharp observation skills, watched her carefully. "Child, come sit with me a minute," Ms. Richards called out once the lunch rush had settled. She patted the chair next to her with a weathered hand. Emily hesitated before taking the seat. Ms. Richards was someone she'd previously avoided engaging with beyond basic care duties, but something in the older woman's gentle expression drew her in. "You're carrying a heavy load today," Ms. Richards observed, her wise eyes studying Emily's face. "I recognize that look. It's the same one I wore when I lost everything in '85. Had to start all over with 3 kids to feed." Emily's eyes widened. "How did you manage?" "By remembering that my worth wasn't in my wallet," Ms. Richards replied, reaching out to pat Emily's hand. "You see, baby, life has a way of stripping everything down to show us what really matters. Sometimes we need to lose what we thought we had to find what we really need." Tears threatened to spill from Emily's eyes. "My old friends want nothing to do with me anymore. I feel so alone." "Alone?" Ms. Richards chuckled softly. "Look around you, child. You've got a whole family right here who sees your heart growing day by day. Money comes and goes, but genuine connections, that's what carries us through." Emily glanced around the dining room, taking in the familiar faces of residents she'd come to know over the past weeks. Where she once saw a burden, she now recognized wisdom and strength. "Thank you, Ms. Richards," Emily whispered, genuinely touched by the unexpected support. "I never thought I'd find such kindness here." Ms. Richards squeezed her hand gently. "That's because you weren't looking for it before. But now your eyes are open, and you're seeing what was here all along." The next morning, Emily stood before her mirror, straightening her uniform with newfound purpose. The weight of financial stress still pressed on her shoulders, but something had shifted inside her. Instead of seeing her job as a mere means of survival, she now recognized it as an opportunity for growth and connection. As she walked into the elder care home, she greeted her coworkers with genuine warmth. The morning sunshine streamed through the windows, casting a gentle glow on the common area, where several residents were already gathered for breakfast. "Good morning, everyone," Emily called out, her voice carrying a cheerfulness that surprised even her. Mr. Jefferson looked up from his newspaper, offering her a knowing smile that made her heart swell with appreciation. Throughout the morning, Emily immersed herself in her duties with renewed energy. When Mrs. Anderson needed help with her breakfast, Emily didn't just assist. She sat down and listened as the elderly woman shared stories about her days as a schoolteacher. Emily found herself fascinated by tales of classroom mishaps and small victories that had shaped countless young lives. During lunch preparation, Emily noticed the kitchen was short-staffed and immediately volunteered to help. Her co-workers exchanged surprised glances as she efficiently arranged meal trays, adding small personal touches she knew certain residents would appreciate. An extra sugar packet for Mr. Thompson's tea, crackers arranged just so for Ms. Coleman's soup. "I've never seen you so invested," remarked Sarah, one of her co-workers, as they worked side by side. Emily smiled, carefully placing a flower on Ms. Richards' tray. "I guess I finally understand what this place is really about." From her office doorway, Ms. Turner observed Emily's interactions with quiet satisfaction. She watched as Emily knelt beside Mrs. Parker's wheelchair, listening intently to a story about the woman's late husband, offering genuine comfort when tears welled up in the residents' eyes. Later, during activity time, Emily joined a group of residents playing cards. She laughed at their jokes, celebrated their wins, and shared in their competitive spirit. The atmosphere in the room was light and joyful, filled with the kind of genuine connection she'd never thought possible when she first started working there. "You're different today, dear," Ms. Coleman noted as Emily helped her back to her room. "There's a light in your eyes that wasn't there before." Emily paused, considering the observation. "I think I finally understand what matters," she replied softly. "It's not about where I used to be or what I lost. It's about being here, really being here, with all of you." As the afternoon progressed, Emily found herself taking on additional tasks without being asked. She organized the activity room's bookshelf, helped with afternoon medications, and even stayed late to assist with dinner preparation. Her co-workers noticed her enthusiasm, and the atmosphere around her grew increasingly warm and collaborative. Ms. Turner watched this transformation unfold throughout the day, noting how Emily's smile had become genuine, her touch gentle, and her patience seemingly endless. The head caregiver felt a surge of pride, recognizing that the seeds of compassion she'd hoped would take root in Emily were finally blooming. On a bright Saturday morning, Marcus and Jaden Evans pulled up to the elder care home in their sleek black car. The sunlight caught the building's windows, creating a warm, welcoming glow. Jaden fidgeted with his seatbelt, curiosity and anticipation evident in his expression. "Remember, son," Marcus said softly, "we're just here to observe first." They entered the building quietly, keeping to the edges of the common area. The space buzzed with gentle activity, residents chatting, watching TV, or engaged in various activities. Emily moved among them with an ease that surprised both Marcus and Jaden. They watched as Emily helped Mr. Jefferson with his crossword puzzle, her patience evident as she spelled out words clearly and offered encouraging smiles. When Ms. Coleman needed assistance with her knitting, Emily carefully untangled the yarn, sharing a laugh with the elderly woman as they worked together. "She seems different, Dad," Jaden whispered, noting how Emily's genuine smile reached her eyes, unlike the forced politeness she'd shown on the plane. They observed as Emily handled a small crisis with grace. A resident had spilled tea on himself, and Emily quickly helped clean up while ensuring the man didn't feel embarrassed. Her gentle words and kind touch showed a level of compassion that seemed natural rather than forced. After watching for a while longer, Jaden looked up at his father, seeking permission. Marcus nodded, and Jaden stepped forward, approaching Emily as she organized some magazines on a table. Emily looked up, startled by Jaden's presence. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure, offering a genuine smile. "Hello, Jaden," she said softly. "Hi, Ms. Carter," Jaden replied, his voice clear and confident. "I've been watching you with the residents. You're really good with them." Emily's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Jaden. This place, these people, they've taught me so much. I'm thankful every day for the opportunity to work here, even though I didn't deserve it after how I treated you." Jaden noticed the sincerity in her voice, how her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Everyone deserves a chance to change," he said, wisdom beyond his years evident in his words. Emily's eyes grew misty. "Working here has shown me how wrong I was about so many things. These wonderful people have taught me that kindness and character are what truly matter." Marcus watched from across the room as his son and Emily continued their conversation, noting how naturally they interacted now. No tension, no fear, just genuine human connection. As they prepared to leave, Jaden turned to Emily one last time. "I'm proud of how you've changed, Ms. Carter. You're doing good work here." Emily's eyes welled with tears at his words, touched by the forgiveness and maturity shown by the young boy she had once treated so poorly. She felt a surge of determination to continue proving worthy of this second chance. At their elegant dining room table, Marcus and Sophia sat discussing Emily's transformation over cups of steaming coffee. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across their thoughtful faces. "She's made remarkable progress," Marcus said, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood. "But I want to be certain before offering her old position back." Sophia nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I think you need to understand where her prejudice came from in the first place. People don't just wake up one day carrying such heavy biases." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "We should know if she's truly changed, or if she's just learned to hide her feelings better." Sophia leaned forward, her expression serious. "Have a real conversation with her, Marcus. Find out what made her who she was, and see if she's genuinely moved past it. The next day, Marcus arranged to meet Emily at the Corner Cafe, a quiet coffee shop known for its private atmosphere. Emily arrived promptly, dressed simply but professionally, her nervousness evident in the way she clutched her purse. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said, gesturing for her to take a seat. They ordered coffee, and Marcus waited until the server had left before speaking again. "I've been watching your progress at the elder care home," he began gently. "The residents speak highly of you, and Ms. Turner has noticed significant improvement in your attitude." Emily's cheeks flushed with pride, but her eyes remained downcast. "They've taught me so much," she admitted softly. Marcus took a careful sip of his coffee before continuing. "I need to ask you something difficult, Emily. That day on the plane with Jaden, I want to understand where that behavior came from. What made you react so strongly to my son?" Emily's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "It happened 8 years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father was walking home from work when he was mugged. The attacker was a black man." She paused, blinking back tears. "Dad was in the hospital for weeks. He never fully recovered from the trauma, and I let that one terrible incident color my view of an entire group of people. I know now how wrong that was." Marcus listened intently, his expression compassionate but serious. "That must have been devastating for your family," he acknowledged. "But you understand now that judging everyone based on one person's actions isn't right?" "Yes," Emily nodded, wiping away a tear. "Working at the care home has shown me how much pain my prejudice caused. The residents there, they've shown me nothing but kindness, even when I didn't deserve it. They've become like family to me." Marcus leaned forward. "And what about Jaden? How do you feel about your actions now?" "I'm so ashamed," Emily confessed, her voice breaking. "He was just an innocent child, and I treated him terribly because of my own biases. I can never fully make up for that." Marcus arrived home late that evening, his mind heavy with thoughts after his conversation with Emily. He found Sophia and Jaden in the living room, both looking up expectantly as he entered. The warm glow of the table lamps created a cozy atmosphere perfect for their important family discussion. "I spoke with Emily today," Marcus began, settling into his favorite armchair. "There's more to her story than we realized." He shared Emily's account of her father's mugging, explaining how the traumatic incident had shaped her views. Sophia listened intently, her expression softening with understanding, while Jaden sat cross-legged on the carpet, taking in every word. "She was only 16 when it happened," Marcus explained. "Her father was badly hurt, and she spent weeks watching him recover in the hospital. That fear and anger festered into prejudice." "That must have been terrible for her," Sophia said quietly, "but it still doesn't justify what she did to Jaden." "No, it doesn't," Marcus agreed, looking at his son. "What do you think, Jaden? You've seen her change at the care home?" Jaden thought for a moment before responding. "She seems different now, like she really understands what she did wrong." "I think we should meet with her one more time," Sophia suggested, "to be absolutely certain she's ready to return to the airline." Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone to send Emily a message. The next morning, Emily arrived at Marcus's office, dressed professionally but fidgeting with nervous energy. Marcus gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Emily," he began, his voice firm but kind. "Before we discuss your possible reinstatement, I need to know, why do you believe you deserve a second chance?" Emily sat straighter in her chair, meeting his gaze. "My time at the care home has taught me how wrong I was," she replied. "I let one terrible experience poison my view of an entire group of people. I hurt your son and I hurt countless others with my prejudice. I understand now that every person deserves respect and kindness, regardless of their race." "And what have you learned from this experience?" Marcus pressed. "I've learned that prejudice comes from fear and ignorance," Emily answered, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "The residents at the care home showed me what real strength and dignity look like. They taught me that kindness isn't about who someone is on the outside, but what's in their heart. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering her words. After a thoughtful pause, he explained that while he was willing to offer her old position back, it would come with conditions. She would need to maintain the highest standards of professionalism and respect with all passengers. Any hint of prejudice would result in immediate termination. Emily nodded eagerly, tears of relief forming in her eyes. "I understand completely," she said. "I won't let you down again." Emily stepped onto the aircraft with a mix of trepidation and determination. Her freshly pressed uniform felt both familiar and strange, like putting on an old piece of clothing that had been altered. She touched the airline's badge on her lapel, reminding herself of the second chance she'd been given. As passengers began boarding, Emily made a conscious effort to greet each one with genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard," she said, making eye contact and offering a sincere smile to everyone, regardless of their appearance or background. She helped an elderly Asian woman store her carry-on bag and assisted a Hispanic family in finding their seats, feeling a sense of pride in these simple acts of kindness. Halfway through the flight, a commotion arose near the back of the business class cabin. A black businessman stood in the aisle, his face showing clear frustration as he held his boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat," he explained, pointing to where another passenger was sitting. "I specifically booked 14C for the legroom." Emily approached the situation calmly, her heart steady. In the past, such a scenario might have triggered her prejudices, but now she saw only a passenger who needed help. "Sir, let me check your boarding pass," she said warmly. After examining the documents, she discovered a system error had double-booked the seat. Instead of becoming defensive or dismissive, Emily listened patiently to the passenger's concerns. "I completely understand your frustration, sir," she said. "Let me find you an even better seat." She quickly scanned the cabin and located an available seat in the first row of business class, offering superior legroom and service. Her colleagues watched the interaction with varying expressions. Sarah, a veteran flight attendant who knew Emily from before, raised her eyebrows in surprise. Tom, a newer crew member, gave Emily an approving nod as she professionally resolved the situation. The passengers' tension visibly melted as Emily explained the solution. "Thank you for your understanding," she said, helping him settle into his new seat. "I'll make sure you're comfortable throughout the flight." Throughout the remainder of the journey, Emily maintained her positive attitude, checking on the relocated passenger regularly and ensuring his needs were met. Her genuine care and attention didn't go unnoticed by her fellow crew members, who began to see that her transformation was real. As the flight neared its end, Emily felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced a challenging situation and handled it with the grace and fairness she had learned during her time at the elder care home. The badge on her uniform no longer felt like a weight, but rather a symbol of her growth and commitment to being better. Emily sat in her small apartment that evening, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as she reflected on her first day back at the airline. The shift had gone well, better than she'd expected. Yet something gnawed at her consciousness, preventing her from fully embracing the satisfaction she should have felt. During her conversation with Marcus, she had mentioned the name James Wilson, the man who had mugged her father all those years ago. The memory of speaking that name aloud made her stomach clench. Despite all her progress at the elder care home, despite the genuine warmth she now felt toward people of all races, that specific memory still held power over her. "Maybe I haven't changed as much as I thought," she whispered to herself, wrapping her arms around her middle. The shame of her lingering resentment felt heavy, especially after all the kindness she'd been shown by the residents at the care home. Across town, Marcus Evans sat in his home office, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emily's story had stirred something in his memory, something he couldn't quite place at first. The name James Wilson and the location she'd mentioned, the corner of Maple and 4th Street, kept repeating in his mind. He pulled out his laptop and began searching through old files. Years ago, he'd been the victim of a mugging in that same neighborhood. The incident had occurred just before his business started taking off, when he was still working late hours to make ends meet. Marcus found what he was looking for in a folder marked 2010 Personal. There it was, his own police report from 15 years ago. His hands trembled slightly as he read the name of his attacker. James Wilson. The coincidence seemed impossible. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the information. The same man who had attacked him had also mugged Emily's father, setting off a chain of events that led to her developing such deep-seated prejudices. He searched through more records, finding newspaper clippings about similar incidents in that neighborhood during the same time period. Each article seemed to confirm his suspicion. They were dealing with the same James Wilson. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of this revelation. Unlike Emily, he had managed to move past his experience without letting it poison his view of others. But he understood now, on a deeper level, how such trauma could shape someone's worldview. The connection felt significant, almost like fate had brought them all together for a reason. Marcus began making notes, determined to verify if his suspicions were correct. He would need to visit the old neighborhood, speak with people who might remember and piece together the full story. He glanced at a photo of Jaden on his desk, thinking about how this discovery might help Emily fully heal from her past. If they shared this connection, perhaps it could be the key to helping her completely let go of her remaining prejudices. The following morning, Marcus adjusted his tie in the mirror, his expression determined yet thoughtful. He had chosen to dress casually but professionally. Nothing that would draw attention in the old neighborhood, but still maintaining an air of authority. His two most trusted bodyguards, Thompson and Rodriguez, stood nearby in plain clothes that would help them blend into the crowd. "Remember," Marcus instructed them, "maintain distance but stay alert. We're not looking for trouble, but we need to be prepared." The bodyguards nodded, understanding the delicate nature of their mission. They had protected Marcus through his rise to success, and they knew when to be invisible and when to act. As their unmarked car wound through the city streets toward the old neighborhood, Marcus found himself lost in thought. He remembered the years of hard work that had transformed him from a struggling businessman into a successful airline owner. The memory of that mugging could have bitter him, could have turned him against others like it had done to Emily. Instead, it had fueled his determination to succeed and protect his family. The car pulled up to a quiet corner a few blocks from their destination. Marcus stepped out, adjusting his jacket as Thompson and Rodriguez dispersed, maintaining their positions from different angles. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same worn brick buildings, the same corner stores with faded awnings, the same narrow alleys between buildings. Marcus walked slowly down Maple Street, his shoes clicking against the concrete. Every step brought back vivid memories of that night 15 years ago. The sound of footsteps behind him, the cold press of metal against his back, the harsh voice demanding his wallet. He paused at the corner of Maple and 4th, the exact spot where it had happened. A movement caught his eye. From a nearby alley, a man emerged, tall and lean, with a distinctive limp in his right leg. Marcus felt his breath catch. The police report had mentioned that distinctive limp, both in his case and in the attack on Emily's father. The man's face, though aged, matched the description perfectly. The sharp cheekbones, the small scar above his right eyebrow. The man shuffled along the sidewalk, his hands thrust deep in his pockets. He moved with the same predatory awareness that Marcus remembered from that night, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. When his gaze landed on Marcus, there was a flash of recognition, not of Marcus as a victim from the past, but of Marcus as a potential target in expensive clothes. The man changed direction, beginning to move toward Marcus with practiced casualness. Thompson and Rodriguez noticed immediately, shifting their positions with subtle efficiency. As the man drew closer, his hand moving toward his pocket, Marcus stood his ground, letting his bodyguards close in. In a matter of seconds, Thompson and Rodriguez had the man firmly but discreetly restrained, their movements so smooth that few passers-by even noticed. The man struggled briefly before realizing the futility of his situation. Marcus stepped forward, studying the face he had last seen 15 years ago. James Wilson's eyes widened with sudden recognition, not of Marcus as a victim, but of Marcus as the wealthy airline owner whose face occasionally appeared in the business news. Marcus stood before James Wilson, his expression calm but resolute. "You've been busy over the years, haven't you, James? Quite a few muggings under your belt. including one involving a man named Carter. Wilson's face twitched with recognition before he tried to mask it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, struggling against Thompson and Rodriguez's firm grip. 15 years ago, you put a gun to my back on this very corner," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "And 5 years before that, you did the same to Thomas Carter. Both times, same method, same location, same distinctive limp." Wilson's defiance began to crumble under Marcus's unwavering gaze. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can. The police reports match perfectly and your face hasn't changed that much. The scar above your eyebrow is quite distinctive." Marcus stepped closer, his presence commanding. "You hurt a lot of people, James. Not just physically, but emotionally. The trauma you caused rippled through their lives, affecting how they saw the world." After several tense moments, Wilson's shoulders slumped. "Fine," he spat. "Yeah, I did it. Both of them and others too. What are you going to do about it now?" Marcus pulled out his phone, dialing 911. He calmly reported finding the suspect in several unsolved muggings, providing the exact location and details. After ending the call, he scrolled through his contacts, finding Emily's number. The phone rang twice before Emily answered. "Emily," Marcus said gently, "I need you to listen carefully. I found the man who mugged your father." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "He's also the same man who mugged me years ago. The police are on their way, but I thought you might want to face him yourself, to find closure." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you sure it's him?" Emily's voice trembled slightly. "Yes, he's confessed. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but I thought you deserved the choice." Another pause, then Emily's voice came back stronger. "I'll come. Text me the address. I need to see his face." Marcus sent her the location and turned back to Wilson, who stood sullenly between the bodyguards. In the distance, police sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing moment. Marcus felt a deep sense of peace settle over him, knowing that justice was finally catching up to James Wilson. As the first police car rounded the corner, its lights flashing, Marcus thought about how this moment would affect both his and Emily's lives. The source of so much pain and prejudice would finally face consequences for his actions. Emily's hands trembled as she approached the scene, her steps measured and deliberate. The evening air felt heavy around her as she took in the flashing police lights and the small group gathered on the familiar street corner. Marcus stood tall beside two officers while James Wilson remained handcuffed between them, his head bowed. Marcus caught her eye and gave her a gentle, reassuring nod. His presence provided the strength she needed to continue walking forward, each step bringing her closer to confronting years of buried pain and anger. "So you're the one," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "You're the reason my father couldn't sleep for months. The reason he jumped at every shadow." Wilson lifted his head slightly but remained silent, his expression unreadable. "Do you know what you did to our family?" Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "My father was never the same after that night. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone, and I—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "I let his fear become my hatred. I judged innocent people because of what you did." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You didn't just take his wallet that night. You took his sense of security, his trust in people. You took my childhood innocence and replaced it with fear and prejudice." Wilson shifted uncomfortably, still avoiding direct eye contact. After a long moment, he muttered, "Sorry." But the word fell flat, empty of any real remorse. Emily studied his face, noting the disconnect between his words and his expression. Suddenly, she realized something profound. His apology meant nothing. The power wasn't in his response, but in her ability to finally face him, to speak her truth. The weight she'd carried for years began to lift. The anger that had fueled her prejudices started to dissolve, replaced by a surprising sense of liberation. She didn't need his remorse to heal. She just needed to let go. "I'm done," she said quietly, more to herself than to Wilson. "I'm done letting what you did control how I see the world." The police officers began guiding Wilson toward their patrol car. As they placed him in the back seat, Emily turned to Marcus, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me face this." Marcus nodded, understanding reflected in his eyes. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, the significance of this moment in Emily's journey toward healing and growth. As the police car disappeared around the corner, Marcus and Emily stood in contemplative silence. The streetlights cast a gentle glow over them, highlighting the mix of emotions playing across their faces. Emily turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with gratitude and newfound clarity. "I never thought I'd say this," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "But you've changed my life, Mr. Evans. When you caught me treating Jaden poorly that day on the plane, I thought my world was ending, but really it was just beginning." Marcus smiled warmly, remembering the journey that had brought them here. "Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives become turning points," he said. "When I arranged for you to work at the elder care home, I hoped you'd learn something valuable. But you did more than that. You embraced the opportunity to grow." Emily nodded, thinking about the residents who had shown her such kindness. "Miss Coleman, Mr. Jefferson, all of them. They taught me so much about compassion and dignity. And then finding out about your connection to my father's mugger." She shook her head in amazement. "It's like everything came full circle." The following week, Emily returned to her position as a flight attendant. The familiar corridors of the airplane felt different now. Not just a workplace, but a space where she could make a real difference in people's lives. During her first flight back, she noticed an elderly woman struggling with her carry-on bag. Without hesitation, Emily stepped forward to help, offering the same gentle assistance she'd learned to provide at the care home. The woman's grateful smile reminded her of Ms. Coleman. Later that day, she helped calm an anxious child traveling alone, drawing on the patience and understanding she'd developed over the past months. Her fellow flight attendants watched with surprise and approval as she handled each situation with grace and warmth. "You're different," one of her colleagues commented during a quiet moment. "In a good way. What happened?" Emily smiled, thinking about her journey. "I learned to see people, really see them," she replied. "And I learned that everyone has a story worth hearing." That evening, as Emily gathered her belongings after her shift, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Hope your first day back went well. Remember how far you've come." A warm sense of pride filled her chest as she read the message. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. If you enjoyed the story of Emily, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.